Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Blue Baby. The final goal today is Shoal, and I'm not too ecstatic for that, mainly because of the Satan fight, and it's one of those things which I just never enjoy doing, and I always feel like I have to do it to get the points, but I always end up getting hit just because the fight is so damn unpredictable sometimes. And the main reason for that, I feel like, is because you really have no way of knowing if you're in control. The enemies spawn in random positions, the foods come down in positions where obviously you were before, so you kind of have to account for that, and there's really no strategy. For example, when I'm fighting Isaac, I feel like I'm doing something to alleviate the damage that's coming towards me. So for example, I'm standing at the edges, maybe I'm trying to avoid the enemies when they come and start shooting in those tree bursts, maybe I know where to stand to avoid those, and it feels a lot more control, and especially in the third phase, where you know where you have to stand in order not to get hit by the holy light beams. But in the Satan fight, I just feel like I'm running around aimlessly in the third phase, because there are enemies spawning around everywhere, and then of course the foods are stopping down, you have to avoid that. So if you don't have some explosion immunity, it can be quite difficult, and it's really mainly that you don't feel in control, or at least I don't feel in control when I fight that fight. So if you have any tips or maybe ideas on how to tackle that, to be just a bit more efficient at it, or maybe that I would be a little less panicky, that would be well appreciated. I feel like I have it down, but every time I go in and try to fight, it just ends up hitting me. And I'm not sure if there's something I'm doing, maybe there's a lack of judgment in me trying to fight it in the first place, but sometimes I end up thinking that it's just better to skip it, because if you have something like a Forget Me Now, you can just end up using it without fighting it, or maybe there's a Sacrifice Room, you can just end up going to that and just ignoring those maybe 200 points that you get for fighting him, because if you do get hit, you're gonna be losing way more than you're actually gaining. So unless you have a really powerful run, I think it's a good idea to just maybe avoid it or maybe do something else. But okay, the Satan fight, enough about that. What I wanted to talk about here is the Black Hole item. It's an item that was added in that Booster Pack 1, and it's a fun item. It's a really novel concept, because you throw the black hole, it sucks everything in, and I really feel like it's one of those things which doesn't really have a place in Isaac, but it exists because why not? And what's great about it is it doesn't only suck in enemies, but also every single projectile, and that sucking motion is really strong. So when you throw it somewhere, you're essentially safe for the next 10 seconds, and you have free reign over hitting enemies, and that's great, because that allows you, if you're maybe strong enough, to kind of dispose of the whole room at once, and it's also very efficient because it puts them on the spot. So I feel like it's a really fairly balanced item for what it is. 4 charges for basically having all enemies at once, or just on one very particular spot. If you have any AoE abilities, it's great, but even without that, I feel like it's still a really decent item. And it happens to be great against bosses, and I feel like this would be something that would work really well in Boss Rush, and I really wanted to try it, especially now that there's a bug where you get 4 charges instead of 2 for beating every wave, so essentially we would essentially always have this item up. And there was also fun synergy. We could have bought Car Battery and then have double the sucking power, which I don't think would really change much except do a little bit more damage, but I'm all up for fun and wacky synergies like that, so I definitely considered picking it up, but restock kind of came in the way, and I know that I'm not really the kind of person who tries to break that often, and sometimes I just end up avoiding these items, but I feel like restock has a lot more strategical value in a Blue Baby run, as opposed to just a regular run where you're using it to try to get as many shop items as possible, and of course Mama Mega and things like that. And in this particular case, what ends up happening is, of course, when you have restock, then you can essentially buy as many Spirit Hearts as you want. When you buy one more common, of course, if you have enough money, you can kind of max out as soon as or as easily as that. And what's really important in that situation is that you have enough hearts in multiples of 3 so that you can afford the devil deals. And the main reason for that is, of course, if there is a good devil deal at the very start, you're gonna end up buying it, and then you kind of want that safety of having enough health while still being to afford every single devil deal that you stumble upon. And you really don't want to make choices or compromises here. For example, you have something like Flight and Dark Bomb, and you only have 3 or maybe 4 Spirit Hearts. Which item are you gonna take? While Dark Bomb is gonna give you more Spirit Hearts in the later phases, Flight is much more immediately useful, so you're gonna bank on taking one or the other. So you essentially don't really want to be in those positions, so that's why I feel like restock has a lot of value as Blue Baby, because you can keep buying Spirit Hearts. And as you can see, every time I try to enter a devil deal, I try to get a multiples of 3 Spirit Hearts, or at least I want to have at least 6 Spirit Hearts, 6.5 to be precise. just so if there were 2 Devil Deals, I could afford them. But what ended up happening in this particular case is the Devil Deals just weren't that good. The first Devil Deal we got was Guppy's Tail, which again works really well with restock, because as long as we have money, we can keep buying keys and opening chests, and that can sometimes maybe give us the seam, getting things like maybe Cricket's Head, is that still in the chest pool? I think it is. Getting the room bag, the blank card, the Forget Me Now, all things like that. I'm not sure if all of those things are in the chest pool, but if they are, or any other item like Goat Head, basically there is a way to get a seam there and maybe get a good item out of it. So for that reason, I felt like it was a good choice, but besides that, there's really no guarantee of knowing which Devil Deals are gonna be good in the future. And in the average case, I would say the Devil Deals are pretty decent, but in this particular daily, they just didn't turn out to be stellar. So that initial choice of buying the Guppy's Tail really wasn't that good. I wouldn't call it bad, because obviously it still has its value. It contributes to the Guppy transformation, which we've successfully completed, I think, on the Womb 2 floor. It was a bit late, because we were late for Boss Rush and Harsh, but all in all, it did allow us to be Guppy. So I guess it's not bad in that sense, but it really isn't something that improves the strength of your run as soon as you pick the item up. So what you could end up doing is maybe going via the route, which is less likely, or at least has the chance to still be useful, but is something that a lot of people wouldn't take. And just by the virtue of maybe going with a higher variance route that maybe might not be as good in the average case, can really put you ahead of the competition. So what I'm trying to say is, that most people, when they see a Guppy's Tail in the very first Devil Deal, if they have enough health, which I would assume most people would, because they would get restock and of course buy Spirit Hearts, or at least I would assume so, then when they see the Guppy's Tail, they would end up buying it as soon as possible, because it's one of those items which I wouldn't imagine a lot of people consider bad, and they would just maybe think it's really good. And because of that, what you might end up doing is, okay, instead of going via the route that everyone is going, I'll try to go via the Angel Deal route and just not take any item at all. And maybe you hope that you get a good item out of that. And what's maybe important here to realize is the Angel Deal route isn't necessarily worse than the Devil Deal route, especially now that they've been buffed and you have more items on average, and especially as a character like Blue Baby, you can get more safety, defensive items there, which is also always good, but also you don't really have to struggle of trading your hearts away for items. So for all of those reasons, I feel like going via the Angel Deal route might be more beneficial, but especially when you consider that a lot of people would probably pick up the Guppy's Tail in the first place, which would give you kind of the edge. So if the Angel Deal route was better than the Devil Deal route, it's something that would really kind of put you over the top, because in this particular case the Devil Deal route just didn't really give us anything of significance. It didn't really make our run more stronger, except in the form of Guppy's Tail, Guppy transformation, which came later, but if you got just 1 damage upgrade earlier via that, and I think some people go the Holy Mantle, and of course with the Holy Mantle you can suddenly afford to do much crazier things like walk into enemies a bit more, or maybe just afford to be a bit more aggressive, and of course even if you get hit, it's still not counted towards the damage penalty. So for all those reasons, it's a good idea to do so. And obviously the the Angel Statues, which also give you additional points. So if you do that and go via the path, I would say, of more resistance, which is maybe a bit more unlikely to be better, in this particular case it can end up being positive. And sometimes I end up playing that way and try to make choices deliberately that I know other people wouldn't make, just in the sake of hopes that I would get lucky and maybe something great would happen. And sometimes it ends up working and sometimes it doesn't. It's really about the situation and kind of considering what you have to do. Usually it's more of a thing, oh, if I did that differently, I think it would have turned out better, but there's obviously no way to know what would end up happening if we made a different choice. But it's always such a thing that comes up in retrospect, but when you think about it, I still feel like it's a solid strategy and something that you can add to kind of boost your overall play, or at least increase your variance in some cases to maybe get a better score on 1 or 2 dailies in the future. So okay, that was a bit confusing, so if that didn't make sense, please let me know. I'll try to explain, of course, as always, but we are actually heading to Shoal now, and you can see that we're kind of at the half of the video, maybe a bit more, and there's still a bit to go on, and there's only the Satan fight. So what kind of happens? But I think that's pretty apparent, because I have the blank card and the room bag, and also have Sack Boys, so you can kind of expect where this is going. And essentially this turns into one of those typical breaking runs when you get blank card plus the arrow rune. Of course later on we try to force up not haggle, as what's it called, the Persia rune, to roll the items, and all of that just kind of allows us to not only cap out a swag bonus but also get a Forget Me Now from the signature rune, which we use to do the shoal again. And later on, because this run just happens to be so nice to us, it also gives us a sacrifice rune which we use to go to the dark room. But what I really wanted to focus here on is that I wouldn't normally do that unless it was kind of presented to me in a very obvious way, which I suppose it was, because these items really weren't that hard to find. I didn't really work hard for them in order to get them, but I felt like I had to do them because I missed Boss Rush, I missed Hush, and I felt like that would be something that's unconventional for this run. I really felt like I was kind of below the bell curve in this one, just because I would imagine a lot of people would have a stronger run, because you get Magic Mushroom early on, you get that Guppy still. I just always imagined that people find the Guppy items earlier. I didn't go to one Curse Room, which might be the end of me, because I didn't maybe get something good out of that. But also it would turn out, maybe, I just thought, as I said, is that I would just be behind. So I did try to get, or do everything in my power to kind of catch up. So I figured if I do break the game and try to get as many points as possible via the Jarrow Rune, and of course via the Forget Me Now that I get in the Secret Room, maybe I can eke up some more points and actually get to a point where I catch up to the people who maybe completed all of those daily objectives, but maybe necessarily didn't have as much exploration, or maybe didn't get enough swag. So I hope that I would be able to kind of compete with those. So that's basically the only reason why I did it. But when you look at the points when I use the Forget Me Now, it's one of those things which I feel like it's worth it, and obviously I wouldn't call it not worth it. But when I go to fight the Satan fight, or maybe there's a random show room that ends up hitting me, I get something like 1,000 exploration bonus, end up losing something like 700 because something hit me twice, and that's unfortunate, but there's nothing you can really do about it. It's still worth doing, but it just feels like the reward really isn't worth the pay, or at least how much effort you put into trying to break the game in the first place. Oh yeah, by the way, I didn't use the Purgatory rune, I used the Craig dice which appear to reroll the items in the shop. So I said Purgatory before, so if you were confused about that, that's basically, I just used the Craig dice because they function essentially the same. So what you end up doing is just spawning a bunch of judgments, you play them, you get item pedestals in the Secret Room, and then you basically use the room with a lot of battery charges, with the Craig dice, with the blank card, to reroll them until eventually you're gonna get the Forget Me Now. You use the Forget Me Now, do the whole entirety of the show floor again, you go back, you do the Sacrifice Room, you go to the Dark Room, you pick up as many Spirit Hearts as you can, just so you're not maybe in such a dire position when you do go to the Dark Room. You do that, you go Big the Lamp, and that's basically it. One more thing showed up on this run, which again I tend to usually avoid, and it was the first item that I think it was the first item that I got in the Dark Room, and that was the Clicker, and it's gonna be, I think, in the room towards the left. You're gonna see it when it shows up, doesn't matter. And the Clicker, what it does allow you to do is, first of all, change your character, but more importantly, every time you change your character, it takes one item away from you. And that's very important, because in this particular case I did talk about maximizing my score, so the way to do that is obviously by breaking, by using the Forget Me Now, going to the Dark Room, beating all of these objectives, but using the Clicker does remove that item penalty, even though it's not very high, it's something like maybe 2,000, maybe 3,000 in total here. It did rack up, because I did go to the shop, I bought as many items as I possibly could, to of course try to get Mama Meg on that Hush floor. It didn't really pan out, and it really wasn't successful, but in the process of buying it, I did accrue something like 10 items that I never really used throughout the run. So having the Clicker show up in this situation with so many battery charges on the ground did allow me to get rid of something like 1,000 points in total. So I felt like this was a good investment in my efforts that allowed me to maybe get ahead of the bell curve, like I said before, and just allowed me to get a little bit more points on average. And I felt like all of those things combined, and the fact that I did go through that effort of trying to be as wild as possible, if that makes any sense, did allow me to rank in a relatively good place, the 21st, and obviously it's not ideal because it's only a 40,000 score run on a run that goes to show, which is, I guess, could be better, but really if you're looking at it, and if you consider that I could get to Boss Rush, to Hush, that I could take much less damage, this is easily something like a 55,000 point run, and if you're really good at the game, I do imagine you can get something like 60,000, and maybe a bit more than that, but obviously that would require me not to take any damage at all, which I'm never in the camp for. Sometimes I just like walking into enemies for no reason. But yeah, it was a fun run, even if a bit longer. I'm really not used to maybe these longer types of commentaries, so if you did make it to the end, please tell me how I did. I did try to record and re-record it like 10-15 times, and the main problem is not that I don't feel like I can talk about it, it's just that I feel like because these videos are fast-paced, I try to stay up and kind of talk a bit faster and just try to convey as much information as possible, and that can be quite tiring, and sometimes it's just hard to find words to fit, and then maybe there's a little pause and whatever, and I feel like I can't really afford that because the video is moving so fast and the daily is going so fast that I need to focus on what I'm saying. But yeah, a fun run with 41,000 points, give or take, and we did finish in a relatively good spot. Even though it was a pain for the first half, at least it was much more fun for the second half. And sometimes you just enjoy breaking a bad run, because at least then you show the game who's boss, and that's always exciting. So I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.